Death is the unyielding truth that binds us all, an inevitable, profound, and deeply intimate encounter with the finite nature of life. It arrives without warning, shattering the world we thought we knew. In its wake, grief emerges, often dismissed as something to fix or get over. But what if grief, in its suffocating pain, is not a burden to carry or something from which we need to move on? What if grief is instead a sacred invitation, an opening to feel more deeply, to connect in unimaginable ways, and to transform all that we knew to be true? I'm Laura Walton, and I'm so grateful you're here. Together, let's step into the uncharted terrain of death and grief, not as something to fear or avoid, but as a force that shapes us, breaks us, and ultimately remakes us. Let's meet it not with resistance, but with curiosity and courage. And let's do this on purpose. Welcome back to Grief on Purpose, the podcast. Today, we are here with special guest, Dr. Pete. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
So I'd like to ask you first just to share a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist by training. So my PhD is in counseling psychology. And so I work in the mental health field, which is kind of interesting today because when I first started studying, I graduated in 2011. So like not that long ago, but from where mental health conversations have gone in that last decade is wild. In 2011, when I graduated, there weren't really a ton of sports psychologists, for example. There weren't a ton of, I guess, corporations were thinking about mental health, but more from like a performance perspective. Are my employees, am I getting the most out of them? Like, rather than we need to be mindful of well-being and wellness and all that. Along that journey, I started to explore Zen Buddhism, and I was raised Catholic, and one of the first things you learn about Zen is that like nothing's forever. It's like the first noble truth. And also that like label and identities don't really mean anything. They're created. And so that came after like years of meditating and trying to understand and build that Zen practice. So I think that, Laura, that was like one of the things that you and I connected on, was because also like when you're doing meditation, you have to come across yoga at some point, like you can't not. And so during grad school, I like found yoga, and all that became like a part of my life. I think probably initially just trying to find like a deeper connection with life and its purpose. And then, so now today, like I have this beautiful marriage between psychology, mental health, and Eastern practices. And that's always where I see like Zen and meditation and yoga kind of fitting in.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we originally became connected when I guested on your podcast on air with Dr. P, correct? Yeah.
That's right.
And we were talking specifically about grief because obviously that's the world in which I'm in,
Yeah.
and touched a little bit on yoga practice and Zen Buddhism as a practice, and are circling back to this conversation here today.
Here we are. Life's full of circles.
It is full of circles. Yeah. So the topic of our first conversation was the topic of grief. So I'm curious I don't know much about your story at all. So to hear whatever it is that you are willing to share about your experience with grief.
Well, my experience with grief, so from a Zen perspective, so I experienced grief at a young age. I will say that I'm very privileged in many ways. So one of the things in counseling psychology and which I gravitated towards to get my PhD was really about multicultural competence. And so to have the conversation around contextual behavior, who are we? We're not just a diagnosis. We are so much more. We're our family. We are our culture. We are our language. We are all these things. And I will just say, in a little provocative way, like I have a boring life. Like sometimes I'll go to a doctor for my annual physical, and I'm like, they'll ask me all these questions. I'm like, yeah, it's boring. No, haven't had surgeries. Nope. 120/80, my blood pressure will be like, it's all sort of a textbook. And so, but that's privilege. Like I grew up in a sports family, so I was always active. Diet and exercise and well-being were like a part of our life regularly. So yeah, I'm one of three growing up in that way. So the boringness is there wasn't a ton of trauma. I had grief because I lost grandparents and all of that. And we went to the funerals, and I think my parents did a decent job. I know you and I both in the mental health space, like historically, a lot of the psychodynamic or Freudian kind of practitioners will blame mom and dad for everything. And as a behaviorist, we don't do that. They're a part of the formula. And so my parents were divorced. And so people could say that was trauma. Trauma is really sort of subjective in many ways, the way I see it. So yeah, it was, so the grief piece of it was like the first loss I can remember was like a great uncle. And that might sound weird, but as a Greek Italian family, our holidays were just like, it's Greek to me. Is that the movie? What's the movie? I can't believe I can't think of the name of it, but
The Big Fat
you know
Greek
what I'm talking
Wedding.
about? Exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that was I could, that was our family. So they were always like loud and tons of food, and especially on my dad's side. And so I remember that his loss. He was like a very kind of paternal figure in the family. And then when my grandfather died, that was probably like my first sort of loss as a kid. And then my mom's mom. And then by the time my dad's mom died, I was very close to her. My friends all knew her. Like she was sort of this like figure, very maternal. She was the Italian side. And, you know, that grief is just normal. It wasn't traumatic by any means. It did lead to conversations of my paternal grandfather of, oh, he was depressed. They called it because he had to have a few open heart surgeries. And so we don't know because medicine's changed a lot. There was a sort of hypothesis that maybe this quote unquote depressive presentation was subsequent to cardiac issues. We don't know. But looking back and talking to like my dad and brothers and stuff like that today, like he was totally depressed. And being around that is like a sort of a constant state of grief because there's just like such heaviness, especially if you think about Eastern practices, the energetics of it all. As I reflect back, and he was heavy, like he was heavy to be around. He was not very pleasant and all that. And then I'm going to fast forward to a godparent because that was the first loss where I'd been studying and deep in Zen. And so the first noble truth of Zen is that there's non-attachment. And so the intellect in me, I'm a professor and I do research and I publish and all that. So I am a scientist. I like looking for answers and things. So the intellect in me was like, oh, I'm not going to be sad. It's just non-attachment. I'm going to go there and this is just what happens in life. And then I remember just being there with like my brother, my mom, my brothers and my mom and crying. And then I was like so disappointed in myself. It's like, how are you crying? You're not really studying Zen. Like you don't even get it. Those are my internal dialogue. But it was like so humbling and like validating to be like, oh, okay, you know, you're still human even when you practice this stuff. That was another sort of experience that really stood out to me.
That sounds like a big one.
Yeah.
I love this. I don't even know if it's a quote or not, but after enlightenment, the laundry, or after enlightenment, the dishes, like that concept.
Yeah.
Quote, maybe it might be a book too, but that's something that I've heard of that for a long time, but lately that's been for whatever reason like really present for me, and just trying to navigate this balance of having certain experiences or practices or studies or beliefs or whatever, but also balancing that with the experience of being human and having those emotions that come with it.
Yeah. So for listeners, like enlightenment is the fourth noble truth. And what you'll learn is that there's actually no such thing of it. Because once someone's arrived or believes that they are enlightened, then they've already taken a step back. So you don't really achieve. And that's the practice in this, is that it's not about achieving. I didn't get that initially. When I first sat down with my teacher, Robert Kennedy Roshi, whom I've studied 20 years with, my first conversation was like, okay, how do I do this? Like, I want to be the best Zen practitioner. Because it's the high performer in me. I was like, so what do I got to do? Do I got to stop drinking? I got to stop eating meat? What do I got to do? And he just looked at me and he was like, you're exactly where you need to be, which is so annoying. I did not understand that. But it makes for a good story today because it was just truthfully how this happened. And I did stop eating meat. I did stop drinking. I took all those so the teaching is that you don't want to alter your mind state. And so anything that's mind altering, you try and avoid, in addition to you don't cause suffering. Vegetarianism within any kind of Eastern practice is that you don't want to cause suffering to other animals. Of course, like geographically, some of the Buddhists that are in the mountains, like they have to eat meat because they can't grow crops. So they just are more mindful of it and thank the animal for it. Alcohol, I've always had a healthy relationship with substances. I've never been someone that was like a big party person. Again, very boring background in that way. It was exciting. Like I did bartend and I was up until 6 a.m. many a time, but usually just having a couple drinks. And I just never did hard drugs or things like that. So I don't have that kind of like background either to come to this, but I just wanted to like find a way of diving deep into the meditative practice. So for 3 years, I didn't drink and I still haven't eaten meat since then. Actually, that's been something I've stuck with. And I'm now technically pescatarian. I'll eat fish every so often. But other than that, I think trying to find ways of just going deep into this whole idea of what Buddhism was.
Yeah. What initially drew you to that practice?
I don't know. It's like the chicken or egg conversation because I'm not sure. So some shamans have told me that in past life I was clergy within some of these practices. Listeners may or may, I feel like your listeners might understand that. And I have no facts to support that. The scientist in me is what is that? But I love being open to these ideas. And so there's probably something about that in me where it's sort of been like a little kind of innate in my practice, I'd say. Now, there was suffering. So by no means am I saying my boring history means there's no suffering. By all means, there's lots of identity issues. There was pain, like last born and bullied in periods of time and all that stuff that goes along with human development. So I do think, and we may have talked about this when we chatted our first time, but like, I do think sometimes yoga or sort of Eastern practices, people with a lot of pain and suffering gravitate towards that because they're trying to heal, which is cool. But so there was probably a piece of that. Like I was in grad school and trying to heal and trying to understand myself and go like inward. I don't know that there's anything more powerful of diving deep inside yourself than an Eastern practice like yoga or Zen meditation.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that look like as a regular practice for you today?
So one of the things I always say with like clients or students is just like everything in life, it ebbs and it flows. So when you listen to this, it's not, oh, I'm not doing it that way, or notice the judgment that comes up. But how it looks ideally is first rising, so meditating at sunrise and at sunset. That's the traditional way of doing it. I aim for about 30 minutes each period. So I aim to get about an hour of meditation every day, at least. And so one of the things I'm very mindful of is like, I look at my phone right away when I wake up. So my morning routine is get up, bathroom, and brush your teeth and all that. Dogs are next usually because they're priority, and then sit. So feed the dog, sit. Then the dogs will usually become a part of the meditation, so that they'll either lay down with me or they'll come over. If they're like energetic and annoying, they'll come over and lick me and want to play. But building that into the practice.
Yeah.
And so there's cushions usually. One of the things I always like to tell people is you should have a space that's just for that. So you don't want to do it in bed before you go to bed. You don't want to do it like at your desk chair, because those things are related to different activities. So a space that's just for meditation. Privileged, I've got a few. Built my house in a retreat way. Like if you come over and a lot of my friends will say that we've made it too comfortable. That's why they want to stay long, because that's how we build it. But yeah, so sitting on cushions. Then you go through the day. Each day has more of mindfulness, so you can like correct, because you might get cut off while you're driving. You might be late to a meeting. A supervisor or manager might annoy you. You might have a difficult client in our situation. And then by night, and usually somewhere around like the 9 o'clock time, I try and my devices go off at 9, no matter what. So there's a few people that can contact me after that, but then that's it. So clients know you'll get it the next day, contact. And then the nighttime sit is actually in a different space usually, and on the cushion. And so the way we meditate in Zen is just all stillness. So it's eyes open, gazing down. It's sitting cross-legged or lotus, whatever you're able to do. And then sometimes you're working on a koan. Sometimes you're working just on stillness, the breath, things of that nature. It depends on my mood, what I'm working on when I sit. But a lot of it's just based on stillness.
Yeah. Okay. So when you had that experience where you were expecting to have or hoping to have non-attachment to the death of somebody who you loved, and then that didn't happen, you did have the human emotion. How did you come to terms with that?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I still am coming to terms with it. I don't know. I think there's a real like humility in the practice of Zen. There's no what I always say is Zen is really about unknowing, because we're so conditioned to, and we learn. And that's why I think it's such a beautiful like dialectic that I'm like a scientist professor who practices Zen. Because and my teacher, Robert Kennedy, is like brilliant. He's 92 now as we're recording, and so well read. And it's so interesting because I'll talk about this like a lot of times just organically, like when he's giving a talk, he's referencing like 2, 3, 4 authors. And they're not off, it's not like the same. Because there are people who are like good at regurgitating the same lines over and over again. I've been studying with this man for 20 years, and each time I'm hearing like a new author and so I challenge him sometimes where I'm like, it's so intellectual, and so my goal in delivering Dharma is to make it as like real as possible and accessible. And I do it with athletes. And so you need to do it that way too, because athletes don't want this hugely intellectual kind of abstract idea. They want it just to be like measurable and simple. And I think it's meant to be that way, in my opinion. So I guess I'm still like, I think I'm okay with it. I guess at a certain point, like I said to you in the beginning, I judged it for a minute. Oh, you really don't get this. But then I came to understand. It's like when I first started yoga, you had to get all the poses. But then there was a time where I was like, no, it's okay. Like I could set the intention of the pose. I might not do a headstand. I'm 6'4", like 6'3". That's the competitive part of me. There's no excuse. There are many people I could do it, but I have really like terrible core. I've always had a terrible core. So I'm okay with that. I just let it go. And I guess that's what I've done with this godparent, was just like, yeah, cool. I'm human. It's what it is. And then cry it out and then be there. Because I will say, this might be interesting, because I had a client that I lost. And so it's always an interesting thing. I teach ethics and I teach skills and CBT and all this stuff, do clinical supervision. So you always talk about these things. And sometimes you have a client who dies tragically or things of that nature. And it's happened to me over the course of the time. But as an adult and like a real professional, like the grad school like journey is so long, and you have all these like false identities and imposter syndrome. But as a real adult, like in my groove, providing the care that we provide, I lost a client, and this was a very young client. I don't really work with young clients, but this person happened to be like a very high performing athlete, and so it just fit. And it's ethics. Do we go to the wedding? Do we go to the funerals? What's our role in these things? And I went to the funeral, and I sat in the back, didn't talk to anybody. But I went and I just cried. I just cried in the back, because this was a person that really had an impact on me, and I knew had an impact on the community, because I saw it when their teammate, all their teammates came up on the altar at one point, and it was one of the moments that I lost it. Just seeing these young people grieving the loss of someone close to them. That's why I love your work, and I said it to you when you were on my podcast. It's so important, because grief is just so complicated.
Yeah, it is so complicated. So that death that you just talked about occurred while you had already been in your Zen practice for a period.
Yeah, this wasn't that long ago.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly. And I think I'm trying to like protect some confidentiality.
Yeah.
So I'm probably trying to be a little vague on purpose, but it wasn't like terribly long ago, like within the last 5 or 10 years. So yeah, I was at least midway through my studies. Yeah.
Okay. So in that experience, you, as you shared, had the appropriate human emotions that might come with having somebody we care about die. Did you notice any commentary going on for yourself in response to that?
None. I think it was like a real kind of cathartic healing Zen grief moment. It was there was no understanding this. It was just to be in it, because loss and grief, I think, can be really complicated. Look, if my 95-year-old grandparent dies, it's sad and understood. We could find some peace in it. And I think some of these more like different types of loss impact us in certain ways. So if I was forced to just accept what was, because there was no understanding it, you couldn't find an answer as to why something like that would happen.
Okay. So it sounds like what you're saying, you found yourself in a mental space where you were able to accept it as being the reality of what had happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I got the phone call because I had all of my college teammates over. So like once a year we all get together. It's often at my house because I don't live that far from the university where we all went. It's Eton Hall University. And so everyone was over and I got the phone call, that this person had passed. And I'm funny. Anyone that knows me or my team would tell you that because I'll go into like mode. It was like, okay, like what do I got to do? Do I got to support this person, that person? Because there was other people around and all that. But it was like a little bit later where it like just hit, and being around. And almost all of my teammates that were there are parents. All of them are. I'm just reflecting on that. They all are. I'm not a chosen decision, but they're all parents. And so for them to hear, and I guess I shared, I don't remember that fully, but I'm sure that I did because I'm pretty transparent in that way. And we can still protect confidentiality. It's, oh, this just happened to a client.
Yeah.
You're not saying anything about them. And so I was able to share the moment because what that does from a mindfulness perspective is say, hey, hold your child a little bit tighter tonight because you have them tonight. You don't know if you're going to have them the next moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It just names, I think of it in terms of just naming the reality of the situation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So in your ability to be able to, it sounds like, do that, to just accept this as being the reality of what happened, even though it might be sad, even though maybe if you could change it, you would change it, but that was the reality, and your ability to be able to be in that. What do you think that does for you?
It definitely brings peace. It definitely just brings peace. Like some people will hear what I just said about hug your child tighter tonight because they're there. They might not be there in the next moment. They'll hear that as like a dark, oh, this Dr. Pete is gothic or whatever. No, it's just living in the moment.
Yeah.
And we don't always do that. And I'm guilty of it. I don't always live fully in the moment. There's things that I avoid because I'm anxious or sad or I just don't feel like I want to do it. That's okay. And just naming it, like you said.
Yeah, being in the moment. In my experience too, I found that practice of being in the moment just such a powerful thing. I even remember when the most significant death that I experienced, when that happened, there was some in the immediate days afterwards. It was the biggest, hardest thing that I could have had happen in my life at that time.
Yeah.
And so there was no room like for anything else to exist for me.
Yeah.
And I've over the years reflected back on that as in some ways like missing those times, and in some ways wanting to go back to that because it was so focused on just this one thing. That's all there was. And that's an interesting experience. And I think
For
to have.
sure. Yeah. I was talking to someone recently, and the idea of hospice came. Oh, one of my colleagues, her dad just passed, and her mom is on hospice. And you read that like people are most clear and least anxious as they approach death.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we see that from mindfulness and Zen practice is that because you are truly in the moment, because there is no future, and so a lot of times we are holding on to the past or worried about the future. And so the goal is how do I get into the present moment. And I don't know if you either saw it. We'll give a shout out to Dying for Sex. It's on Wondery. It's a podcast. And also
I did watch it. Yeah.
So Nikki is a dear friend and she was on our podcast, Nikki Boyer, the producer. And I like stumbled upon that podcast. I do love Wondery as a producer. They have really good content, but how beautiful it is to live in the moment. This was somebody that needed a diagnosis to then go explore sexuality. And I'm not saying every listener should go explore sexuality and live this sort of, I guess, what some would call an immoral life. I hate that I'm judging it in that way, but just to live for the moment, to say, hey, like I'm in this unhappy marriage. And there's a lot of people that stay in marriages that are unhappy or discontent. And many times it could make sense, but in other times it's about, is that how you want to live? And it's not to say you live without suffering. It's just that, can I live fully with what I need in this moment? Which means I might just have to have the difficult conversation. So if you find yourself unhappy in a marriage, what are you unhappy about? And can you commit to having the conversation to change it and reflect on what you've done to help improve it? Because it's not your partner only. It's everyone that's involved.
Yeah.
And I think that she had such bravery to just make that decision.
Yeah, I agree. It's not an easy thing to do. And there's so many stories that can come with it. I shouldn't do blah, blah, blah. I shouldn't, just all the
Right.
layers of stories that we hold or that we hear from the world that oftentimes I think influence our ability to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So in all of your experiences, all of your studies, your practices, do you have any beliefs about death?
I do, and they're non-scientific.
One of the things I really like about you is this balance between the scientific and the non-scientific.
Yeah. Because I just don't understand it. And I never will. And we have no data really on it. Sometimes if we're dealing with someone suicidal, I just want to end it. You don't know if it ends. Like, you don't know if your suffering gets worse after you do it, if you attempt to complete. You don't know because we just don't know. I don't know if I shared this with you when we talked last time, but Chinese medicine is a big part of my life. A lot of clients I work with and married into it, and it's a big piece of. And so for listeners, like, Chinese medicine is thousands and thousands of years old. It's a really like energetic acupuncture you may have heard of. Like, that is the root of Chinese medicine. But then there's also herbs, and so I bring that up to say, like, all of that is energetic. And when people connect with that, they connect. Now, I don't know that it's always Long Island medium energetic, but I do believe that stuff like that can exist. So I guess I don't want to be put into a coffin personally. I think that, to me, is like silly. Like, I'm claustrophobic in life. You think I want to put my body into a box? My beliefs. It's okay if people want to do that. But I also don't believe it's that ends. Like, the scientist in me says protons, neutrons, electrons, like physics, like things move and they don't just stop. So I think the soul or some sort of energy of us continues. And in Zen, we do talk about reincarnation. I know my Catholic sort of upbringings did not, but reincarnation. Now, do I think it's like, I've studied with a few like Tibetan monks. One was the last to escape Tibet and was like seen as a reincarnate of a Dalai Lama. And so the way that works for listeners is, like, in some of these communities, they identify a child who like represents some pre-existing sort of reincarnate, like clergy or sort of person in the community. I don't understand that. Like, so that's hard for me to understand. But I do think that we have rebirths. I don't know how many, because I think that there's some of these Eastern sort of energetic things. There's X amount, and depending on whatever number of life you're on, maybe you're going into some other universe. I also don't think that this is the only universe, but I don't understand that really. But I know that it's not just like these is it 9 planets? I think. Yeah, whatever.
They change it.
Whatever it is. I think that's when I learned it. So maybe there's a 10th or 11th now, but there's got to be more out there. And so that's my long answer for what my belief of death is. It's like there's a little sprinkling in of something, some knowledge, but that most of it is just unknown.
I love that. And I feel like that's in some ways similar to how I might explain my belief system, but I do struggle in that not being scientific, not having like, I want the proof for it. I want to have more concrete answers sometimes. So how do you balance that?
I guess that's where it's a gift of Zen, that Zen just really helps you balance the unknown.
Yeah.
With that same colleague, when I was talking about hospice earlier, like, she was saying that she kind of feels almost like an orphan, even though she herself is older in her life and having just lost her first parent. We have 2 parents, so the first to go. So I try to make sense of that, because hearing her say that, I was like, wow, that's like deep. Like, how could you sort of feel like an orphan even though you spent an entire life with the person? But it makes sense in some ways. So I think that the balance is just like, each person has their unique experience. I do think that's part of who I am as a person, but also multicultural competence of helping people just explain their reality, because each person's reality is their own. It's not right or wrong. It's just their own.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very different. I had a feeling that your answer was going to point back to the Zen practice. That seems to be a great tool and a great practice for life in general, but finding that balance between the knowing and the not knowing, the being.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned you have a teacher for your
Yeah.
Zen Buddhism practice. If somebody weren't, for whatever reason, might be not working with a teacher, are there other ways to practice it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just meditation. And I mean, obviously, like Google, like you can chat GPT, you could probably look stuff up. I had a client come in recently who like chat GPT a response to a sister, and he read it to me, and I was like, that's good. Good. Go ahead, ChatGPT. And again, I'm not mad at that. I think there's some of our people in our community that are like, oh my God, this is going to take over the world. It's probably not in this lifetime. But if people are curious, I mean, I think there's lots of stuff online. My teacher being 92, with COVID, we pivoted to Zoom, and they were so like anti-Zoom pre-COVID. And so now it's like beautiful that there's like this gift, and there's people all around the world who log in and, you know, we'll sit and meditate together, and there's some teachings, and so you can stay connected, which I think is beautiful with technology. So look for that, find it. There's any books. I mean, I think you just kind of find your own way to get there. I do think having community is important. I will say my daily practice is my own, but you know, at least quarterly, you know, in an ideal world, pre-COVID was quarterly, but trying to do what we call sessions. So they're like longer sits. Sometimes even if it's just 2 or 3 days, like I've done up to 11. So there's 11 days of sitting in silence, and so there's always communities that you can kind of gravitate towards and just look to see what's out there. And it doesn't only have to be Zen. Like that's the other thing. Like I recently did one that was called insight meditation. It was transcendental. Sometimes I try and go to those ones because I don't know anyone there. So I don't have to work. Like a lot of times if I go within my community, I'll be asked to do something, which is nice. And I would like to also just go there to be a participant.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So how do you, if you didn't have your Zen practice and the perspective that comes from that, do you have any insight into how grief, whether that's past grief or at some point there's going to be more grief that happens in your life, how that would look different or be impacted without a practice like Zen?
Well, when you asked that question, I just saw my mom's face. And so my mom is like the anti-Zen. Not like she's very caring and loving, but she is not very mindful, or in her defense, maybe she's gotten a little bit more because I've just exposed her to it a bit. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Irish would just drink a little bit extra. They would pretend like it's not there, not talk about it, isolate a little bit. I mean, I'm sure people will connect with that.
Yeah.
But it's obviously less healthy. I do wish in the West we had a better just accepting of grief and loss. I think we talked in our conversation about the diagnosis and complicated grief or bereavement, or I don't know. I was recently with a client they were saying that they were told that maybe they didn't process a loss, and like to process a loss. I don't like that word, the verb to process. The scientists in me cannot measure that. I don't know what it means to process. And so you're telling me that once you quote unquote process it, do you get a certificate? And then 20 years from now, when you think about this person that you love, you're not going to feel a certain kind of way? No. So you're going to feel it. So it's not about eliminating feelings. It's not about any of that type of stuff. So even for my mom, like I'll kind of force her to talk about her mother, because like after her mom's passed, she couldn't really talk about it, or like a dog that passed, she couldn't talk about it. No, you have to talk about it. Like you have to just. And so what I've been doing, my oldest dog is 15, and she was given 3 to 6 months to live 2 years ago.
Oh.
So this is where the Western medicine kind of just messes with us. It's like, A, how did you know that? B, why did you say that? And C, obviously you weren't right. Like, because she is like almost healthier now than she's been, other than the tumors that are growing out of her mouth and her head. Like, and she stinks and she bleeds all over the house. The 2 years has given me the time to, and I would, the first year or so, people were so like triggered, because they'd be like, oh, what's going on? I'd be like, oh, Tabitha's dying. They'd be like, what? Like, that's so mean. That's sad. And I'd be like, I'm just hoping she doesn't wake up tomorrow. They're like, that's so rude. Like, it's like, but this is also part of my process, also like exposing and just having the conversation of like, I'll be sad the day that hopefully she doesn't wake up, because that's the best case scenario, because I'd rather not have to euthanize. But until then, I don't know. And just talking about it. And so like, I've even exposed my mom in that way, and she'll text me like, oh, how's Tabitha? And I'm like, she's still alive. Like, and that's sort of our running joke. A lot of people around me, and again, especially when you're older, you're facing it. Erickson, like, you're in that sort of last stage of life, and so you're not always ready. What is that? Integrity versus despair, that last stage. But how do you know when you're ready?
Yeah, especially if you've never looked at it or talked about it.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why we're here talking about it.
Thank you for that, Laura. I'm glad you create the space for it.
Yeah. Well, it's such a big topic, and not all of it can fit into a pretty short conversation. But is there anything else that feels important for you to say in the topic of grief for today?
Well, I think earlier, just a few moments ago, when you asked about my teacher and it was people were curious, what came to mind for me was my teacher. Is actually, I was remiss to say this, he's a Jesuit priest. So he's in the Catholic Church, and the Jesuits sent him to Japan to study meditation, because Jesuits are sort of known to be like forward thinkers, like always trying to and so his books that he's written one of them is called Zen Gifts for Christians. I'm looking to see my bookshelf if they're here. They're like in all of my offices. This is the actual Chinese version, which I cannot read to you, but one of his teachers actually translated it. But this one's Zen Spirit, Christian Spirit, and Zen Gifts to Christians, because what he did is he founded at the UN the interfaith dialogue. And so how can we have conversations around interfaith? So there will be listeners that are like, well, I can't meditate because it's against my religion. And the truth is, it's all integrative. So with clients I work with, it's like, if you pray the rosary, for example, that could be your meditation. If you practice Islam, or if you're Muslim identity, when you're doing your 7 prayers during the day, that could be your meditation. Mm-hmm. Like, just do it with intention. Because a lot of us, like, becomes like this rote memory. Like, we're not really thinking about it. It's sort of like when you try to work and you're like, I don't remember what roads I took. If you ask me to describe them, I just got there. And prayer becomes that. Most faith and religion becomes that, because we don't always choose it. A lot of us are baptized and confirmed if we have the Catholicism practice. Like, so the interfaith conversation is important for people that might be a little resistant to something that they're hearing or feeling like it doesn't fit within their. And I brought my teacher, at my previous institution, I brought him to do a talk on, which is a Catholic institution, just a talk on like sort of the integration of Zen and Christianity. And one of our students raised her hand right as he was done talking, and she was like, how do you sleep knowing that you pray to 2 gods? And of course he answered it with grace, but because there is no God. So in Zen Buddhism, it's in most Eastern practices, certainly in Zen, there are no deities. So it's not like you're praying to someone or anything in that way. It's just about how to live. And that's the Eightfold Path. Things that you can do. It's action. It's not, I was like, Catholics tell you what not to do, and Buddhists tell you what to do, which is also another thing that gravitated me towards it. So I think that's important for listeners to hear too.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that is important. You can see the multicultural competence in you. Thank you. Yes. Well, anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up today?
No, Laura, thanks so much for having me and for having these difficult and important conversations.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here with me, Laura Walton, and my incredible guest on Grief on Purpose. Your presence is a gift, and I'm so grateful you're walking this path with us. For more connection and resources, you'll find everything you need in the show description. To my guests, thank you for sharing your person with us today. It is truly an honor to know your story. I'm your host, Laura Walton. Until next time, be kind to yourself and remember you're not alone in your grief. We are here on purpose.